We're live from Paris here on France 24. Glad you could join us. I'm Eve Irvine.
And I'm Stuart Norville. Welcome to the programme. We're here with the next 4 hours of Live from Paris. Here are today's headlines.
Israel's general elections get underway. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hoping to secure an historic fifth term in office. He is, though, facing stiff challenge from ex-military leader Benny Gantz. Polls have now just opened. We'll be taking a look at what's at stake in this edition.
Iran's top diplomat Javad Zarif has called for US troops in the region to be put on Tehran's list of terror groups, a reaction to the White House's decision to declare Iran's Revolutionary Guards as such, the first time Washington has designated part of another government as a terrorist organisation.
Tripoli's only functioning airport has now reopened to traffic. It was forced to close after airstrikes over and around the Libyan capital. The forces of Khalifa Haftar, the strongman from the east of the country, continuing their push for control of the city, trying to wrest it back from a UN-backed government.
Good to have you with us. Also coming up this hour, as uncertainty over Brexit continues, car makers in the UK, which need important parts from other EU countries, are planning temporary closures to minimise the risk of a disorderly departure. Others have moved at least some of their production to other countries. We'll be taking a look at that in our business update.
Meanwhile, in perspective, the widow of a world-renowned tenor saxophonist Gordon Dexter will be on set telling us what life was really like for a black jazz musician in the 1940s and 50s. Maxine Gordon has just published a biography on his life and times, completing a promise she made to him when he was dying, even if she did include a decade he was planning to leave out.
Well, I'll be back later on in the programme, but now here's Eve with the main news of the day.
This is Live from Paris. Israel's general elections are now underway. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is hoping to secure a fifth term in office. That would see him overtake the country's founding father, Ben Gurion, as the longest-serving premier. However, Netanyahu faces corruption charges and also strong competition in the form of an ex-general who has promised a clean government and social cohesion. While as voting drew near, Netanyahu hardened his stance, as Laurent Berstaker now reports.
Israel's security has always been Benjamin Netanyahu's #1 priority. And after 13 years in power, the prime minister remains a polarizing figure at home and abroad. Praised by some for his strong leadership and his ability to keep the country safe, he's also been branded a warmonger who's fundamentally opposed to peace. In July 2014, Netanyahu's administration launched Operation Protective Edge with the aim of stopping rocket attacks from Gaza into Israel. Some 2,000 Palestinians were killed, most of them civilians, in a 50-day war which the prime minister considered a success. But Netanyahu's use of military force wasn't always popular among Israelis. 74% said they were dissatisfied with his performance in the 2018 Gaza crisis, in which 28 Israelis and 184 Palestinians were killed in clashes along the border fence. Economically, Netanyahu boasts a rather positive track record. But if Israel's GDP has grown by 30% since he returned as prime minister in 2009, the country continues to struggle with high poverty rates and rising inequalities. On the international stage, Benjamin Netanyahu has forged several key alliances, including with controversial heads of state, such as Hungary's populist president Viktor Orban and Brazil's newly elected far-right leader, Jair Bolsonaro. But his most important ally has certainly been Donald Trump, whose attitude and policies towards Israel marked a sharp turn from that of his predecessor, Barack Obama. Trump's pressure campaign on Iran and his decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital were largely seen as major political wins for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, polling stations in the country opened just 5 minutes ago. You can see there people already coming in to cast their ballots. They will remain open until 8 p.m. local time. That's 9 p.m. Paris time. And we will, of course, be keeping a close eye on those votes as they carried out throughout the day. Well, in Israel, the country's proportional representation system ensures that no one party ever gets an overall majority. So leaders are having to form coalitions. A record 47 parties are competing for seats this year. That's what those voters are going to have to choose from. And for the first time in a decade, polls are predicting that the Likud party may not come out on top, notably facing that strong competition from Benny Gantz's centrist Blue and White alliance. However, the party with the most seats isn't necessarily one that forms the next government. Andrew Hillier explains how the system works.
In Israel, the name of the game is building a coalition. The Israeli parliament, the Knesset, has 120 seats. 61 are needed to form a government. But since the country's birth in 1949, no party has ever single-handedly won a majority of seats. This time, two blocs are certain to finish above the rest. They are Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party and Benny Gantz's centrist Blue and White alliance. But they'll have to cobble together the support of several smaller parties if they're to have a shot at forming a government. And it's not necessarily the candidate with the most seats who gets the first chance at forming a coalition. That opportunity goes to the candidate who receives the most recommendations from all of the parties that win seats. He or she then has up to 42 days to form a majority before Israel's president asks someone else. The country's political system means fringe figures often end up becoming kingmakers. This time, the Zehut party's unexpectedly strong support could give it that role. The party's right-wing leader advocates legalizing marijuana and annexing the occupied West Bank.
Now, for the first time, the United States has designated part of another government as a terrorist organisation. Iran's Revolutionary Guard, now seen as such by the White House. It's a move that immediately drew ire from Tehran, with calls for President Hassan Rouhani to place US troops on a similar terror list. Ellen Gainsford takes a closer look.
Ramping up the pressure on Iran. In an unprecedented move, the US is raising the stakes to isolate and stigmatize its enemy number one.
This is the first time that the United States has designated a part of another government as an FTO. We're doing it because the Iranian regime's use of terrorism as a tool of statecraft makes it fundamentally different from any other government.
The decision will block any assets that the Revolutionary Guard may have in US jurisdictions and bar Americans from any transactions with it. Donald Trump has said that anyone doing business with or financing the group will be treated as a supporter of terrorism. Iran has warned it plans to retaliate. In a tit-for-tat move, top diplomat Javad Zarif has urged President Rouhani to place US forces in the region on Tehran's list of terrorist groups. Zarif also took to Twitter to criticize the US president.
Another misguided election eve gift to Netanyahu. Another dangerous US misadventure in the region.
The Revolutionary Guard is a paramilitary group, only answerable to Iran's supreme leader. But the organization also plays a big part in the country's finances. The US estimates it controls up to 50% of the Iranian economy, meaning the sanctions would further hobble Iran's ability to do business. The country's already feeling the pinch. Separate financial sanctions were reimposed in 2018 after Donald Trump's decision to pull the US out of the Iran nuclear deal.
Tripoli's only functioning airport had to close after airstrikes over and around the Libyan capital. The forces of Khalifa Haftar, the strongman from the east of the country, are continuing their push for control of the city, wresting it back from a UN-backed government. Well, as fighting escalated, calls from the international community for a pause to allow civilians to flee are being ignored.
I think the first message we need to pass united is the full implementation of the humanitarian truce to allow the civilians and the wounded to be evacuated from the city and to avoid any further military action and any further military escalation and the return to the political negotiations and the political track.
Well, the charity Doctors Without Borders say they're particularly worried for hundreds of migrants currently stuck in detention centres near the Libyan capital. Nicolas Germain tells us more.
The funeral of a man who fought for Libya's UN-backed government. Since last week, East Libya's strongman Khalifa Haftar and his men have been advancing on Tripoli. Dozens of people have already been killed.
Take revenge on the criminal Haftar, who's killing our children. He's coming to invade Tripoli.
The internationally recognized government's fighters vowed to defeat Haftar, who used to be a general in former ruler Muammar Gaddafi's army.
We will protect this capital to the death. We once protected Misrata against Gaddafi, and this time we will give our lives for Tripoli.
On Monday, an airstrike by Haftar's forces closed Tripoli's only functioning airport. They said they had targeted a military jet, not civilian planes. Observers fear the renewed fighting could disrupt oil and gas supplies. Doctors Without Borders voiced concern for more than 600 migrants, including women and children, who are stuck in a detention center in the war zone near Tripoli. The UN said that thousands of civilians were now fleeing the capital. Haftar, who's 75, is backed by Russia, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates. They view him as a bulwark against jihadists and have supported him militarily, according to UN reports.
OK, let's take a look now at some other news in brief. Shooting heard in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum this Tuesday. Demonstrators have been gathered outside the compound of President Omar al-Bashir, calling for his resignation. They say security forces are trying to remove them. The security forces are, they say, from the National Intelligence Service. On Monday already, soldiers and those forces clashed as some soldiers who guard the compound moved in to protect the demonstrators. Algerian lawmakers are set to confirm an interim replacement for President Abdelaziz Bouteflika following his resignation last week. According to the constitution, the Speaker of the Upper House of Parliament, Abdelkader Ben Salah, would take over and organise new elections in 90 days. However, protesters say they want to see an overhaul of the political system, their impatience clear as they held fresh elections, criticising Ben Salah, among others, last Friday. And pleading guilty to bribing some of the most selective universities in the US. A dozen prominent parents, including actor Felicity Huffman, were charged last month in a scheme that saw test scores rigged and coaches bribed. Huffman said to have paid $15,000 to boost test scores. The plea agreement states that prosecutors will seek a sentence of 4 to 10 months for the fraud, which can see sentences of up to 20 years behind bars. Now, 3 leaders of the 2014 umbrella movement in Hong Kong that called for free elections there have been found guilty by a court. Their crime to commit public nuisance, it's punishable by up to 7 years in jail. As they entered the courthouse, the accused said they would continue their fight for freedom no matter what the outcome. The trial, which in total put 9 campaigners in the dock, has brought concerns over political freedom once again to the forefront. Laurent Versteker takes a look back at the umbrella movement.
September 2014, tens of thousands of residents took to the streets of Hong Kong in an unprecedented act of defiance against Chinese influence. They opposed a planned reform of the city's electoral system and accused Beijing of failing to organize open elections. For over 2 months, protesters staged massive sit-ins in downtown Hong Kong, shuttering businesses, blocking roads, and bringing traffic to a halt. Chinese authorities soon deemed the movement illegal and sent in police to disperse the crowds. Despite having garnered much international attention, the protests largely died out by December without having forced any tangible concessions from Beijing. In 2016, authorities formally charged several of the movement's leaders with conspiracy and incitement, charges which human rights groups said were politically motivated.
Now, it's been hailed as a world first broadcast, the opening of an ancient Egyptian mummy's coffin live on TV. A 2-hour event broadcast on a US channel took viewers into underground tombs near Cairo, untouched for thousands of years. Putting it live on TV, part of a push by the government to promote the country's heritage. Naomi Lloyd takes a look.
Look at this! Oh, God. I can't believe this.
Live on TV, the 2,500-year-old mummy of a high priest unveiled to US viewers. The golden figure depicting Isis, an ancient Egyptian goddess. A team of archaeologists worked to prise open 2 other coffins, more properly known as sarcophagus. The contents revealed live on air.
He does have a mask.
The remote burial site south of Cairo was discovered a year and a half ago. Amongst the antiquities uncovered, a mysterious wax head.
This is amazing.
This cemetery belongs to the priestess of the god Thoth, the god of wisdom. And next door to this big, large cemetery lived Queen Nefertiti.
The former Antiquities Minister is also behind the Tutankhamun exhibition on in Paris at the moment, and which will later tour the world. As Egypt seeks to improve its image as a safe place to visit after 8 years of political turmoil, and just months from the opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the government hopes that global interest in Egyptian archaeology will bring back the tourists.
Okay, here's a quick reminder for you now of our top stories this hour. Israel's general elections are underway. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hoping to secure an historic 5th term in office. He is facing stiff challenge, however, from an ex-military leader, Benny Gantz. Polls have opened. You can see live pictures there coming to us. And we'll be taking a look throughout the day at what's at stake in those elections. Iran's top diplomat Javad Zarif has called for US troops in the region to be put on Tehran's list of terror groups, a reaction to the White House's decision to declare Iran's Revolutionary Guard as such. It's the first time Washington has designated part of another government as a terrorist organisation. And Tripoli's only functioning airport now reopened to traffic. It was forced to close after airstrikes over it and around the Libyan capital. The forces of Khalifa Haftar, the strongman from the east of the country, are continuing their push for control of the city, wresting it back from a UN-backed government.